Welcome to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. I'm Greg Drevenstedt, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine. Our guest today is Austin Rothbard, founder and CEO of Twisted Road, a peer-to-peer motorcycle rental platform. Before we get started, we want to thank Firepower for sponsoring this episode. Firepower provides high-quality, affordable motorcycle products that are distributed in the United States exclusively by Western Power Sports. Firepower's product line includes batteries, oil, OEM replacement parts, and accessories. Protect your motorcycle from the elements with one of Firepower's motorcycle covers. Choose from the top-of-the-line Elite Series cover, the more affordable Deluxe cover, or the Day cover, which conveniently fits in a saddlebag or trunk for use on the go. Find out more at firepowerparts.com or your nearest Western Power Sports dealer. Okay, Austin, welcome to the show. Let's talk about Twisted Road.
Sounds good. I'm glad to be here. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's Monday, and just last week I did my first rental through Twisted Road. So before we get into that, I'd love to hear, kind of how Twisted Road got started.
Yeah, so I was a fairly new rider. I waited until I was around 45 to learn how to ride, basically because my mom said I wasn't allowed to get on a motorcycle.
Common story. Yeah.
Somewhere around 45, I realized I don't need to listen to her anymore. But I told my wife not to say anything. Don't tell my mom. And then somehow my mom found out. So that was interesting. But anyway, so I got a license, and then my family and I were away on vacation like a year later in the Grand Canyon. And all I kept saying to myself was, man, I wish I had my bike. And those 6 words kept coming back, and there was nothing available. The closest rental available was 2 hours away. And it was on a bagger, and I was a new rider. I didn't feel comfortable being on a bigger bike. And this kept happening over and over. And then at one point, I was at my mother-in-law's house, and I wanted to ride the Blue Ridge Parkway. And same thing happened. And I looked online at Craigslist, and I thought maybe I'll just buy a small little beater bike. I'll stick it in her garage, and when I want to ride, I'll ride. And there were 952 motorcycles for sale by owner right in the Greensboro area. And at that point, I said, okay, well, there's 2 issues here. And if I put this company together, I'm solving 2 problems. And that's where I started.
So people may not be familiar with how a peer-to-peer rental network, actually, they probably are. If you've ever rented a place through Airbnb or VRBO,
Yep.
or maybe even rented an RV, that's essentially what it is. It's you're connecting owners with renters. And instead of being places to stay on vacation, this is people that own motorcycles, and they're in various places. And this is how people, rather than renting from a centralized, maybe motorcycle rental company, they're renting directly from individuals, and Twisted Road is the network that connects them. Is that correct?
That's right. And often when I was looking for rentals, I would just find that there was nothing available. Even in Greensboro, I went to a bunch of dealers and said, do you guys have any rentals? Well, we don't do motorcycle rental. Yeah. So, we're basically like Airbnb, but instead of renting someone's house, you rent their bike.
So walk us through the process. I mean, so let's say, in my case, last week, I live in California. I needed to fly to Columbus, Ohio, and I was going to do a motorcycle travel story. I didn't have time in my schedule as much as I would love to have ridden from California to Ohio and back. I didn't have that time in my schedule. I really only had the time that I could be on the ground riding. And so that's exactly what I did. I went to the Twisted Road site and found a motorcycle, fit my needs, and made a reservation. But sort of how does things work in the background? Because I think one of the things with the reason a lot of dealerships, for example, don't do rentals is there's a liability thing. There's insurance and so forth. How does all that sort of work where everybody makes sure that everybody's covered?
Okay, so there's two things you asked about, what happens in the background, and then what about insurance, right? So what happens in the background when you go onto our website, you look through wherever you're planning on riding, you filter for the bike type of bike you want. Let's say you wanted an adventure bike, or you wanted a taller bike, or you wanted something with a certain amount of power. You'd filter those bikes out, and then at that point, you'd find the bike. You go ahead and put in a rental. As part of the checkout, you could purchase roadside assistance or tire protection, and then you can also purchase an insurance package that includes our damage protection. Once you do all of that, it goes into our system, and we do a background check. We look at 15 things. We ask you to upload your driver's license, your front and back, take a selfie, and there's 15 things. But basically, there's a few of them around fraud. There's a few of them around risk on the road, and there's a few around general risk and safety. And so once you've passed all that, the owner gets the request. saying, okay, Greg wants to rent this bike on these days. Once they approve it, you get charged for the trip. So you're not paying for anything if they're out of town or they sold the bike and forgot to take it off the site.
Okay.
And the owner doesn't find out about you until you've passed all of the criteria. So we don't want to waste their time. You go to meet them at whatever location they want. Sometimes often it's their home, but sometimes it's a corner a few blocks away or something. And then they take a handful of pictures and you're off and riding. Like, it's as simple as that. When you're done riding, you bring the bike back, they hit end trip, and then the trip is done.
So you had mentioned buying the insurance package, so maybe you could sort of expand on that a little bit, like sort of what that, I guess, because if you're a motorcycle owner and you're going to rent your bike, you want to make sure that there's any damage, that it's going to be fixed or whatever. And also, if you're riding somebody else's bike, there's got to be some kind of liability coverage while they're renting the bike. So.
Right. Well, think about insurance on your own motorcycle. There's two things that are happening. The first is you're being limited on the amount of payment that you'll have to make by your deductible. Maybe you have a $500 deductible, you total the bike, you only have to pay $500. And the second is, so that's limiting you there. But the other thing is you want to make sure that you're covered for the damage to your vehicle. And when you rent someone else's motorcycle, there are two different equations. So we want to minimize how much the rider has to pay. And we want to also make sure that the owner's covered. And both of those happen in our process. We cover any motorcycle damage that happens during the ride up to $40,000 of damage. If you were riding, you took a turn too fast and you went into the stop sign and knocked the stop sign over, our liability coverage covers whatever the cost of repair to that is. You hit another car, we cover the cost of the car. So anything that happens to another car, another person, or the vehicle is basically covered with, I think, maybe just a few exceptions, but that's generally how it works.
Okay. Well, I can just speak, like I said, I needed to fly into Columbus, and I was able to find a BMW R1200 GS Adventure, which was perfect because I was basically going to spend a week riding in southeastern Ohio. There is a network of motorcycle routes called Ohio's Windy Nine. And just a shout out to that part of southeastern Ohio and Athens. It's sort of based in Athens, Ohio, which is a cool little college town. You can get a map, and there's all these 9 routes that all start and end in Athens, Ohio. The riding down there is really great. A lot of rolling hills, really, smooth pavement. It's like a, real motorcycle playground. So that's where I wanted to go. And the nearest, major airport to Athens is Columbus. It's about an hour away. So I flew into Columbus. I found the bike I wanted. I made the reservation for the number of days I needed to rent it. I flew into the Columbus airport, and then I just hopped in an Uber and went and actually met the guy at his house. We had, been exchanging messages through the Twisted Road website, and then we exchanged phone numbers so we could respond more directly to each other for the pickup. I met him at his house. The bike was clean, full of gas, ready to go. He walked around, as you said. We sort of took some photos to just sort of inspect, because it was an 06. It had some miles on it. It wasn't a brand new bike. So anything that, if there were already any scratches on some crash scars or something like that, wanted to make sure that, whatever I brought it back, it was in the same condition. Super nice guy. And then I zipped down the road and rode the bike for a week, and it performed great for my needs. And then, I made arrangements with him. I had a flight to catch last Friday. I was like, hey, I need to bring the bike to your place about 8:00 so I can get to the airport. He said, no problem. And he was a super nice guy. I didn't even make the request. He's like, hey, I can drive you to the airport. Something I totally didn't expect. Just the guys.
That happened to me.
Oh, really?
That happened to me once in Dallas. Yeah, same thing. I brought the bike back. I'm like, I'm going to get an Uber. He goes, I'll just hop in. I'll take you to the airport. That
same sort of thing. I mean, which was really helpful because he was in a nice suburb, but it was like about half an hour away from the airport. I was like, man, I hope I can get an Uber out here, because it was like, in kind of a more residential area. But he gave me a ride. We talked bikes. He was talking about maybe, getting a new bike, and I asked him about, renting it. And he had said the same sort of thing. He is a commercial airline pilot, flies in and out of different cities. And he's like, I was in Vegas for a few days, had some time to kill. I got a little bit bored. And he discovered the Twisted Road site towards the end of his trip, and he was able to rent a bike for a day. And he was like, hey, I've got a bike, I don't always ride it. I'm traveling a lot. So when I'm not riding it, I can make it available to people. And so that's the other side of it. There's the people like me who, and you, as you said in early, who need to rent a bike. But then the benefit, I guess, for some people is that most of us know we don't get to ride all the time. We maybe ride on the weekends. Maybe we travel a lot. We only ride certain times a year. if your bike is sitting idle, you're often paying insurance for it. And another thing
Right.
is renting your bike out is a way for you to maybe subsidize your ownership costs a little bit, or to basically get paid to use it while you're not using it. So
we have an owner in Long Beach who has a few really beautiful Harleys on the site, and the first thing she said to me after a few months of renting it out was, "Okay, I just paid off my bike." So, all right, cool. And then a few more months later, she comes back and says, "Okay, I just added a tour pack to it, so now it's really cool for riders." And then she bought another bike, and then she's got a friend down the street, and she's helping him rent out his bike. And like she's got like 3 or 4 now. She just put on a 2024, I think, Ultra Glide. Like
nice.
Brand new. She wanted to break it in first and make sure that it was okay. Just listed it. I think probably less than 1,000 miles. So like that's kind of one end of the spectrum. The other is right when I started the company, I remember calling every single rider and owner after and just asking how the experience was. And the owner was so happy of this bike. He's like, "Man, I was so happy that I was able to rent this out. Now with my payment, I can buy these tools I've wanted." And, it's like, sometimes when you have a partner or a spouse, like it's hard to justify spending money on your motorcycle. But if you're going to buy something extra, you're going to buy tools to repair it, some accessories, whatever. And you could just at least say, "Hey, I got all this money from renting it out. It's really not costing our family anything." It's sometimes easier to justify.
That makes sense. I mean, like you said, if you want to, especially like I was on this GS Adventure, and it had a bunch of accessories on it. It had luggage, and it had crash guards, and it had some, an accessory windscreen and things. And I would think if you wanted to make any of those additions to a bike, yeah, that costs money. Or yeah, if you financed your bike and you're making payments on it, but again, you're not riding it all the time. I mean, I can understand some owners perhaps being like, "Well, it's my bike. I'm not sure I want some stranger riding it." But
yeah, that's fine.
I guess you're like, yeah, it's not for everybody, but if you've got the insurance there and so forth, that any damage, is going to be, repaired through, your agreement with the owners.
Yeah, I like to look at it this way. Like my motorcycle's on my site, obviously, and a lot of people think, "Well, man, I don't want anyone touching my bike." It's okay, that's your choice. But my house is not on Airbnb. Like I don't want people sleeping in my bed. Okay, so
Right.
So everyone's got their limits as to what's acceptable and what's not. Often we see someone put on a bike and they'll say, "Yeah, this isn't my main bike, but I'm putting this bike on. It's it's the second bike I've got." They get a few rentals, they earn a little money, and then they pop their primary bike on.
So how does the pricing work in terms of what are the ranges of rentals? Like sort of it's a daily rate, I assume. And so what's the range of prices?
Yeah, I think the pricing usually starts around $70 a day, $65 a day. We give 20% off to every first time rider with us. Or if you have a longer ride, we'll actually throw in a free day instead of the 20% off. So that's good. So and they go all the way up. I mean, some people have bikes on there for $300 or $400 a day, which I think is kind of crazy. We give a little bit of guidance up front. We give some guidance as to what we think would be good. And then if somebody wants to go outside that, we caution them and say, "You're probably not going to get as many rides if you're outside this band." And then if they still do it, sometimes they get rented, sometimes they get rented. But the bikes that get rented the most often are sub $100 a day.
Yeah.
And it just allows people to come in for a day or a weekend and just take something out without breaking the bank.
Well, I mean, like I said, you mentioned your situation of going to the Blue Ridge Parkway or the Grand Canyon. I've been in the same situation myself. I've driven in some beautiful parts of the country and really wished I had a motorcycle with me. But this is, I think, for a lot of people, it's just the reality is that, especially if if you work full time, your vacation time is probably limited, and we don't all get to do the cross country ride we want to go do. I mean, is that if you want to, you live out east and you want to go ride in Colorado, or you want to come out to California and ride up the Pacific coast, you can do that in a shorter period of time. You can fly in, spend 3 or 4 days or a week, and not spend most of that time getting to and from. Again, the cross country stuff is fun, but most people just don't have time for it. That's more of I'll do it when I retire. So it really allows them the flexibility to get a lot more travel in. But I think one of the cool things about this rental process is for a lot of people is you don't get to test ride different kinds of bikes. If you're like, "Hey, I'm interested in, I ride a Harley Bagger, but I'm interested in an adventure bike," or vice versa. You may not be able to get a demo if yes, there are demo rides in certain situations, but you don't usually get to spend a whole day with it or a week with it. So this is a way for you to go test a motorcycle that you're like, "Hey, I want to try, what's all the fuss about with, the new Africa Twin, or a Harley Bagger, which whatever year you may be able to rent it, and you can just go try that.
Yeah, it's like 25% of the people who rent with us are actually doing exactly what you said. They're test riding a bike before they buy it because there's no easy way to test ride. Or the ride is 10 minutes around some 2-mile loop or something. The other thing we have is we have a feature on our site that if your motorcycle's for sale, you can mark it for sale. And then it'll put the price of the bike up there for anyone who's interested in buying it. If someone buys it, we don't make any money. It's just kind of a thing we do for the community. You can filter,
Cool.
just show me the bikes that are for sale. And we had someone last week who rented a bike. Man, I wish I remembered what the bike was, but they brought it back. The bike was for sale. It was listed as for sale. They made a deal and just bought the bike, and it was done. And it was like, it's just, I don't know. It's great helping the community out like this.
So, how long has Twisted Road been, your platform been in existence?
We are just finishing up our, wait a second. I think we're just about to enter our 7th year, I think, in about a month. Either we just entered our 7th year or we just finished our 7th year.
Okay.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I can't remember. But it's around 7 years.
Yeah. So, in terms of rentals, I realize that, there aren't necessarily rentals every place. Obviously that you mentioned Long Beach, this woman who's got several bikes, obviously that's near Los Angeles. That's a huge metropolitan area. Is that typically where, you've got the highest concentration of rentals is near major cities, or how does it kind of work? I guess it sort of depends on the state or the place.
Yeah, there's a few big factors involved. Like the first is how's the weather, right, around year round. So California and Texas are great because there's year round riding. So when you have a place with more year round riding, you're going to get more motorcycles ownership in that area, right, and hence more bikes listed. So year round riding is a big one. And then if the roads are good, like if the roads are good riding, like there's great riding out in LA, which get a little bit to the north side. Like I feel like Chicago, like even if there was year round riding here, it wouldn't be a great riding place because the roads are all straight, and flat.
Right.
Right.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's funny so I live in Chicago, in the northern suburbs of Chicago, and when we talk to people in California, some people say, well, this is my daily rider, which I hadn't heard that term until I got into this industry, because I live in the Midwest and people don't have daily riders. We can't, so I don't know. I try to explain it to people who don't ride what we're providing. And if you think about like pre-iPhones, let's say that you're a photographer, or your biggest hobby was photography and you're traveling the world, and someone says you can't bring your camera, right? It's like you're seeing all these beautiful things and you can't bring your camera to experience it. And that's how it is when you can't bring your bike somewhere. And you can always trailer it if you want. A lot of people do, but we're finding that people are saying, I don't even want to trailer my bike. It's too much of a pain in the ass. I'll just rent something with you guys.
Well, and also it's more expensive. You got fuel and you're towing a bike and all that kind of stuff. And then, once you park it, you've got to deal with that. So, I mean, like you said, for me, I love this peer-to-peer rental idea because it opens up much more of the country to me, given even though I work for Motorcycle Magazine, I have the luxury of being able to ride a lot of motorcycles. I'm often on specific assignments where I'm testing a specific motorcycle in a specific place. And this opportunity to go to Athens, Ohio, I always want to ride there. I've actually visited there many times. I have a great aunt who taught at the university there. I've been to Athens many, many times in cars, or I'd fly in and she would drive me around. I was like, man, this, I'd always heard riding's great and it looks great, but I was always, being toured around in my great aunt's Buick, and so to finally be able to go there and spend a full week and really explore it on my own terms, and have the freedom to do that. I was able to pick a bike that really felt appropriate because a lot of the like rolling hills and tight corners in Athens or in the southeastern Ohio area, it really lends itself to having a bike with low end torque. So I was on a BMW GS that was perfect. A big Harley would be great for that. And but you also want a bike that's going to have good cornering clearance because, like I said, if you're going at a decent pace, it's some pretty technical roads. And so I picked a bike that I was familiar with. I've ridden a lot of GSs before. I was very comfortable on that bike and it worked really well. So now I'm thinking, okay, what are some other places that I would like to go ride and see what sort of bikes are available? Because again, I've done the entire Blue Ridge Parkway in a van with my dad when I was a kid, but I've only ridden little short
Right.
sections of it on a motorcycle. I'm like, that's kind of one of those, like, you really got to check the box and do the whole Blue Ridge Parkway on a motorcycle, maybe Skyline Drive north of that. Well, I'd want
Right.
to fly out there and find a bike I could rent in the southern end of the Smoky Mountain, or the Blue Ridge Parkway is Cherokee, North Carolina. So whatever the
Yeah.
nearest city, Asheville, North Carolina, or something like
Right.
that. Find a bike to
Right.
rent, go rent it for a week, ride it up and back, and then turn the bike in and fly home.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Or you can have it shipped back. So we have some partnerships with trucking companies that do motorcycles, and we can organize that as well.
Oh, for one-way rentals to get the bike
Yeah, if you
back?
want to do a one-way rental.
Ah,
In
okay.
fact, we had a guy who wanted to ride Route 66 and go from Chicago to LA, and we found the perfect bike in LA and shipped it to Chicago before he got on the bike. And then he got the bike and he's riding there now.
Nice.
Actually, I have this great story. So right when we started the company, we might have been open 6 months, and somebody from Iceland, I think, reached out and said, "Hey, I'm going to be in the United States. This is the motorcycle I want. It was a 1250 GS right outside of Washington, D.C. I want to take it for 4 weeks, and I want to drop it off in San Francisco." And I'm like, okay, international, one way, 4 weeks. We've never done that, right? So we're a brand new company.
Yeah.
And so I'm figuring out the insurance and all that. And I said to the owner, I said, "Hey, Carter, we've got this rider. He wants to take it for 4 weeks. And by the way, he'll pay to have it shipped back." And his response was, "There's no need." He's like, "I'll fly out and meet him. I'm going to ride home." And so
that's cool.
Yeah, so
Nice.
cool. So they met at the beginning. And then at the end, they met at the Golden Gate Bridge. They gave his keys transferred back the other way, and he rode back.
Nice. No, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, the whole experience that I went through last week, well, even before that, doing the reservation and so forth, your website's very easy to navigate. It's easy to search and find bikes, find details about the motorcycle. And then there's the communication process. Since I was a new renter, everything I had to go through, like I said, sort of the background check and answering questions, everything was laid out. It was easy to understand. There was also quite a bit of communication leading up to the rental to make sure I knew what was going on. And then, there's been follow-up after the fact, like, "Hey, how was the experience?"
Right.
Encouraging me to review the bike and the experience and the owner. And I think that's great, because that really allows people that are exploring your site is to figure out, like, okay, well, this bike's been rented a few times, and here's what some people have said
Right.
about this person, or this rental experience. But also just, hey, what's this whole process like? If it's new to people, sometimes they're maybe a little bit hesitant, but everything was like super smooth and seamless. So it was great. So I appreciate that you provide this for the community, because I think it's a great asset for people to give them more options with travel and trying new motorcycles. So.
Yeah, thanks. It was when I started, I did a lot of research on Airbnb, and I think the gentleman's name is Andrew Chesky, who's one of the founders, who said that the whole site was designed for trust. And that was important. In fact, I think if I had started the company a few years sooner, I wouldn't have been as successful, just because Airbnb really did a really nice job of bringing this into the community, that you can trust other people that you don't know with your assets. So we tried everything we could to design for trust, and without it, you just don't have a functioning company, because there's all you need is a few really bad reviews saying this happened and they didn't take care of me, or this happened and my bike was stolen, or this happened and this rider did this, and it's over. So like 98% of our reviews are 5-star. We ask people after their ride to give reviews, but then also upload photos, which is kind of cool, because when you're looking for the bike, to see photos of where the bike has been is really kind of cool.
Well, hey, it's great, because I will definitely do that, because I actually had texted a photo to the owner. I was in the ride, and I had two people come meet me that lived in the Northeast. So I had rented an R1200 GS Adventure. One of the guys that met me had an R1200 GS Adventure, and the other guy had an R1200 RT. And so I had his bike parked next to the other two. I was like, hey, they're in good company. We had this nice BMW, adventure touring, sport touring bikes. And because I was there for a travel story, even though I was the one shooting most of the photos, so I was mostly shooting the other bikes, but I've got some cool photos of his bike on location in different areas, and I'll make sure and share those with him. But like I said, it was a really positive experience. Really nice guy that was the owner, and as he said, he's like, hey, I want this to, he's rented a bike through Twisted Road. He's like, I want to make this available to other people that may want to go ride and be in the area. So I know there's a lot of people listening that have bikes, whether they have, a lot of people have multiple bikes. It doesn't have to be your pride and joy brand new bike that you don't want to get anybody to put a scratch on it or even breathe on it. But you've got a second bike that's, that's in good condition. You maintain it reasonably well. Why not put it on the site, make a little money, cover your insurance costs, pay for some gas or that new helmet that you've got. This is a great way to do that. So.
Yeah, we've got a few tools that help riders feel confident with the bike that they're about to rent. So if an owner, we have a 20-point inspection process, and we ask owners to go through this process. It's basically like showing us that the tires are in good shape, that the engine is good, the horn, the turn signals, the brakes, all that stuff. They video it, they send it to us, and then we put a little badge on their motorcycle showing that they've been 20-point inspected, which gives a little extra confidence to the rider. And then we have another program called our 1-2 free program, where after you've ridden two times with us, we give you a free day. Nice. So you could use that on your third ride. And I'll tell you the way to really cheat the system if you want, which is if you rent a bike that's pretty inexpensive and rent another bike that's pretty inexpensive, you can cash in your free day on like a super expensive bike that you never would. Nice. Like nice. A $300 a day, like we don't care. We just let you do it. And that happened. That's like forever. It's like going to get a punch card from the coffee shop. So, you rent a fourth and a fifth time, you're going to get your 6th day free. So nice. Yeah, that's a great program. Also, we have people who just rent all the time from us.
Well, it's good. I mean, it's like I say, there's people that, probably really enjoy the experience. I know we've actually, our magazine, we do travel stories all the time, and we've had a number of them where people have basically rented bikes and they do a travel story about it, and so it's, I know it's something that a lot of people do, because especially if you're trying to cross that's what I've said earlier, crossing the country, like you got to go across the Great Plains, and that may be just way too many miles that are just too flat and straight. You want to get to the Rockies and you live in the Northeast. It's like, well, it's just, it's not going to be great riding the whole way, or it's really time, I think, for most people. So, well, Austin, I really appreciate you telling us more about the Twisted Road story, how you got started. It's a great service for the community. I think anybody you ought to just try it. I mean, a lot of people were probably, before Airbnb got started, we're like, I don't know if I want to stay in somebody's house or something like that. I mean, of course, these days, a lot of people these are vacation homes or dedicated Airbnb rentals. Right. It sounds like that some people do that with these motorcycles, but hey, if you want to try a certain kind of motorcycle, or if you've got a trip in mind, this is a great way that you can fly somewhere, rent a bike, borrow it for a few days, turn it back in and fly home.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again for your time. I also want to thank again Firepower Parts for sponsoring this episode. You can get those parts exclusively through Western Power Sports Dealer. For the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevenstedt. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down.
If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.